everybody. Welcome back to the Goot Reaction. I'm Joe Goot, your host, and with me is Triple M, the main man from the Midwest. Today we're talking about our plutocratic hellscape and a little bit about late-stage capitalism. Real fun topic, real uplifting times here today. So we wanted to start out with just kind of an overview of some terms just to set the stage, and then we're going to dive into some different examples and see where we go from there. As usual, we'll go down some rabbit holes and have a fun time discussing those topics. So I think really, when you think about it, I'll just throw my own little commentary on top here to begin with before we dive into definitions and terms. But just kind of wanted to say that, it is sort of one of those doom topics where I think a lot of people, especially younger folks, kind of catastrophize the concept of late stage capitalism and just sort of the slow circling down the drain of society and culture and our systems of government and all that stuff. And I think it's easy to do that, and I totally get it. I understand that there's a lot of stuff to be a doomer about, and so I don't really blame people for that. And especially when it comes, I think, to the real key issue there, which is the lack of control, the lack of agency. I think a lot of people feel, and that plays into the fact that plutocracy is a government or society where the wealthy have the power and control either directly or indirectly. And so it's not you and me, really, at the end of the day. Granted, we all have our one vote and we all have some agency in that we can impact things going on at maybe the community level, if nothing else, hopefully our, circle of family and friends, at the very least. But really, when it comes down to it, the locus of control is at the higher levels, is at the top 1% kind of thing. So it could be frustrating and kind of demoralizing to realize that, and to think that at the end of the day, even large segments of the population that want certain things, have certain policy preferences, for example, aren't really being heard and don't really have control. So I think, like I said, I get the frustration, and but I also think it's important to discuss this topic because I think there's, in certain cases, maybe we have some ideas that could be useful in attacking some of these problems. Not necessarily saying that we're going to solve everything in 1 hour long podcast, but I think thinking proactively, thinking with the bent towards being productive and positive, rather than just kind of hiding our head in the sand and hoping it changes, because we know that that's never really the answer. So let's get into it then. Again, I already kind of threw out what a plutocracy is, where really that's kind of oligarchs and corporations running things either directly or indirectly. Late stage capitalism, a quick definition of that is it's the current stage of capitalism that began in the second half of the 20th century, that is characterized by globalization, the dominance of multinational corporations, broad commodification and consumerism, and extreme wealth inequality. And I looked at a summary of essentially what all that means, and there are some specific elements to that. Again, commodification, innovation for the sake of innovation, social media, the gap between the rich and poor, stagnant wages, and environmental breakdown. So I thought we would go through each one of those individually, just to add some clarity around that, and to throw some examples of each one of these elements. So the first one is commodification, where really everything becomes consumable, including immaterial aspects like lifestyle and the arts. And so that's one thing that got me thinking of things like NFTs and AI specifically, in terms of commodifying creativity, commodifying things like cultural elements. And so that's one of those things where business is always trying to get more productivity out of its workers, always trying to squeeze more productivity from society. And in theory, we'll get to this specifically in a little bit here, but the chart should go bottom left to top right, equal lines being productivity and wages. And it was that way for a long time. But in the mid 70s, wages started to stagnate while productivity continued to go up. So we'll throw some specific numbers around that in a minute. But again, things like, again, commodifying just knowledge and creativity through AI is a big example of that, I think. And so just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, so around AI specifically, that's the last thing that registered. So I don't know, maybe you're going to get into this in a bit here, but I think back to something Jon Stewart said, I want to say in last week's, the weekly episode, which was AI and technology has offered, you know, corporations, essentially big businesses, the opportunity to have increased productivity without the burden of labor.
Yeah.
I thought, that was something really, as Jon Stewart often does, even though he likes to pretend he doesn't know too much, he seems to really ask really good questions and make some pretty profound statements every once in a while. So,
Cuts to the core of it pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that'd be my big thought there. I mean, when you talk about NFTs and, I know you and I have had some conversations about that stuff in the past, and I never quite could. I mean, I understood what they were, but I never could quite wrap my head around the utility of them in the world in terms of like their actual value. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll jump in there real quick because, and I'll admit, I got caught up in a lot of the hype there, and I think I did see some of the practical use cases and I still think the blockchain in general has some definite practical uses, and I think could be a valuable tool in commerce and other things. But I will say that I definitely bought into some of the extra hype around it, and I think specifically what I was thinking of was around the art side of things, where a lot of individual independent artists were taking advantage of NFTs to be able to essentially offer their pieces in a different way and into a different market, which I definitely appreciate. And that's one of the use cases I thought was great for NFTs. But I think a lot of what happened was, especially in terms of commodification, the art wasn't the point. The point was to do a quick buy-in, hype it up, and then get out and leave someone else holding the bag kind of thing. So it wasn't really so much to appreciate the art and to try to help promote independent artists or even appreciate the piece itself, but it was to find a quick way to make an investment and get a quick return and then move on. So I think that's where I think the kind of the darker side of NFTs and crypto lies, and I think it's the same across all that space is the pump and dump schemes, the overhyping of things, and then again leaving someone else holding the bag. So I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, is that's, you can take a great concept, you can take a really valuable idea, and then someone will find a way to bastardize it for profit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that is, I would definitely agree in that. As anytime an artist or an author or musician or anybody has a better avenue to get their product out there and potentially, maybe find a way to make a living off of it or something like that, that's fantastic. But the way you described how that actually played out reminds me of, there's several things I've seen in society and the market in the last, couple, I don't know, 10, 15 years, which one was like certain states trying to legalize marijuana, and they fought. It was on the ballot different times, or there was different measures to try to get it in place, and it wasn't until the right people were able to commercialize it that then it got pushed through, and so there was a lot of controls on the market or where the product came from, and it's like, okay, but that's not what the people who originally wanted to legalize it wanted. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want it to be overly commercialized. They just wanted access to it. And, the other that I think about there is, and I know we touch on like climate and fossil fuels and stuff here and there, but we're starting to see a shift from, there was a lot of resistance to solar, to wind, to a lot of those things over the past, 20 years, 15, 20 years. But now you're starting to see the big air quote energy companies, i.e. Exxon, the fossil fuel companies, now starting to get into renewables. That's not really what anybody wanted either. They wanted an opportunity to get away from some of those giant mega corporations, to have access to some of these things. But
and essentially they're monopolies, right? So we wanted choice. We wanted different options instead of supporting the same monopolies that, Sorry to interrupt there, but
no, that's fine. That's a great point. So I don't know, just kind of when you said that about the NFTs, it made me think about some of those other things we see in our economy.
Yeah, no, those are both great examples. And on the environment one specifically, think about how one of the big options that people have been talking about for years now is cap and trade. And that's essentially commodifying carbon. So is that, when you think about it from that, and when you break it down to just that level, is that the best solution? Is it the best solution to commodify something? And I'm not saying I know one way or the other because I haven't really studied that, especially recently. But, is commodifying that really the answer, or is that just going to create another market that makes some people rich and some people poor and benefits the people that are already in power and control and already have monopolies? So, I don't know.
I've heard different descriptions of the cap and trade process over the years, and one, and so I won't claim to be able to rattle it off now, but one thing I thought I understood about it at one point was you're not really reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. You're just saying you're gonna pay a certain penalty for doing so.
Yeah, the ability to further pollute. But just pay for that ability.
Yeah, so it doesn't solve the problem. It just brings money back in some form, which is good, I guess, but it doesn't really solve the problem.
Right. It's about what they do with that money, and is that money going to entities or agencies that would then help mitigate that carbon output, or is it literally just like any other market where there are winners and losers, but it's privatized profit at the end of the day, or losses, depending on which side of the you're on.
And the hope is, I think, that you make it enough of a penalty that it incentivizes the companies to reduce their output. But then what's going to happen is their army of lobbyists is going to go in there and they're going to set that penalty right exactly at the amount that they are perfectly comfortable paying, and to continue to go on about their business.
Yep. Yep, just like, I mean, not to continually reference Fight Club, but the that just makes me think of Jack's job of being in the insurance industry, and deciding, or in the industry, to decide if, when there are recalls, and companies deciding, oh, we can afford to have 20 people die and pay out lawsuits for those 20 deaths, those settlements. But as soon as we get above that, that's when it becomes financially burdensome. So that's when we do a recall, because that's when the cost of the recall is less than the cost of the settlements. So is it just going to be like that? Which I get it. That's part of basic business, right? Measuring risks and figuring out costs and making decisions. But like, is that really the best option? Again, commodifying that. So yeah.
Yeah, my guess is maybe insurance, but he was probably an extension of like the legal department of those.
Yeah,
of that car company.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So I think what you got in your last statement there too, and I'll stop then and let you to continue on with where you're going next. But I think as we talk about capitalism and some of these things, are we? The question is, are there solutions for the people, or are there solutions for somebody else? And I think what you just said just kind of touched on that, right? Ideally, if it was for the people, you'd make sure every car was safe and nobody was having any accidents. But if you can even figure there's some break-even point logic there, then I think it's a question of if this this methodology or this system is working for the people or not.
Yeah, no, I think that's like literally the kind of
the
the
question, right?
buzzword for the whole thing. Yeah,
Yep.
the whole episode is about, is it literally for the people, or is it for, the top 1%, top 10%, whomever, wherever you want to cut it off? Is there an acceptable number of deaths for this product? And, is that ever a question that we're okay with a company asking? So yeah, great point.
Yeah, or how long can we deny it? We go back
Right,
to
that's
the
it.
we go back to
Yeah.
the climate change example, and you hear about how back
Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s, Exxon knew about the downside of exactly what they were doing, and just
Mm-hmm.
hid it and denied it for as long as they possibly could.
Yep. Yep, precisely. All right, so another aspect or element of late stage capitalism that we talked about is innovation for the sake of innovation. So, really, again, innovation being valued over pretty much everything else. And I think that's, to me, you can almost also throw the word growth in there. So, thinking of the stock market, if you're not growing quarter over quarter, then shareholders think something is wrong. The board starts asking questions. Stock price might go down, et cetera, et cetera. So really, with the way we've set up the game, it's always growth, 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 and now it's always innovation, innovation, innovation. So think about especially Silicon Valley, and one example that I thought of was their just obsession with the like augmented glasses, like Google Glass tanked. Apple's got a product that they're trying to put out, and you manipulate your fingers, and then you've got this eyeball thing going, and like, who's asking for that? Who really is asking for that? And yet they keep, these companies in Silicon Valley keep trying to make this product. Is it because they're just stuck in this loop of innovation that they feel like they have to produce something like that? I mean, is that really what they're doing? Like, what's the point? In the metaverse is another example where there were already computer games. There's already massively multiplayer online games. There was Second Life. There was already things like that. So was the metaverse something that, again, fun concept, but is that really what people wanted and needed? And I think, Zuckerberg placed a huge bet on that, and it kind of blew up in his face. So, and I also think about like just apps that, like, not just the app itself, but, the app that uh, facilitates other services. So think about like Uber and Lyft, and how those apps were created through Silicon Valley. They lost money for years and years, and they just kept getting investments, investments, investments. And the whole point was to then essentially eliminate all the competition, consolidate. So you really only have a couple options there. Push out the taxi cab industry, totally consolidate power into as few entities as possible, and then start raising the prices, take advantage of your workforce, and maximize profits at all costs. And again, reduce options for consumers then. So that way, once people get used to having those services, especially through the pandemic, that was a huge thing, with like, DoorDash and Uber Eats and things like that. Um, so again, this is this innovation where there was already delivery drivers, there was already ways to go pick up your food and do that, but the convenience and the fact that those things are set up to, again, lose money until they are able to consolidate, remove choice, and then again take advantage of consumers and their own labor force to finally start profiting, and then you really have no choice beyond that. So it's just interesting to see the kind of endless innovation, but not really always in the ways or in the areas that we would like to see. It's based on what these private equity firms and, VC firms think they can squeeze as much profit out of as possible, not necessarily, to your question before, what's best for the people in the long term, but just what's best for them and their small group of investors.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple keywords there. You mentioned, is this something that people need and want? Right there, I would say there's two different buckets. There's
Yeah.
needs, and then there's wants. And I think what we've become is a very much a want economy, you know. And then you said another key word of convenience, because I know people, and not judging, just saying, I know people who will take advantage of each and every convenience that is put in front of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whether it's uh, Grubhub, or like you're saying, or what's the one, Instacart for getting
Yeah.
groceries, you know,
Hmm.
or even just, you know, some of the grocery stores now offer where you can just order online and then pull up and they'll put the groceries in your car.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I think we do have also is a cycle that is, everybody's getting busier and busier and busier. So then they need more conveniences to make sure that they can fit all the things they need to do into that busy life. And it's just this you know, this, and I'm struggling with words today, like this exponentially growing cycle of, okay, well, I gotta be able to do all this stuff. So now I need to take advantage of these conveniences. And is this something I necessarily would have said I needed? Not necessarily, but thank you, Uber and DoorDash and whoever, for putting it right in front of me, and I will gladly take advantage. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
And,
totally.
and I think the other thing to keep in mind with a lot of that stuff is how much of a data driven society we've become too. So a lot of these
Hmm.
things, these apps that you use, you know, you take an Uber and Lyft, I mean, think about anything. Think about back to 10 years ago. I don't know, maybe not quite 10 years ago, when it was popular just to uh, do your little, you know, you're doing your morning run or whatever. And so you turn on your phone or your watch or whatever it was to say, oh, track my workout. And so, you know, oh, look, I did this. I ran around town for 3 miles or whatever. And okay, so, and then I certainly got to post that, because if I was going to keep track of it, I mean, you know, might as well tell everybody about it, right? So
Yeah.
I put that out on Facebook or wherever, and then now Facebook's got that data. Hey, look, so and so goes on a run every morning, and sometimes they go this route and sometimes they go that route. And then they start to think about, well, what information do we need to put in front of that person? Oh, hey, look, you run past this certain coffee shop every morning. Maybe there's, you know, you're starting to look into advertising things, you know, now that, or you run past, it's probably a small like coffee shop might not be able to tap into that, but maybe.
Yeah.
um
No, there was a advertising technology like that around that time, or maybe 5, 6 years ago, where they were starting to be able to say, like, data pinged on your phone, connected to a hotspot in a store, and then compared to your average data, average routines and stuff. So yeah, there's definitely technology like that out there.
yeah, so that is one of the big drivers for these companies that want to offer you these services. It's more for them than
The
it is
free
for
apps,
you. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that's an awesome point too, because, and I don't want to go down too far down this specific rabbit hole, but if you think about, just, I think you said the key part there was cycles, just this spinning up of getting busier and busier and busier and needing conveniences, needing shortcuts, needing, I don't care how much it costs, I'll pay the extra fees, but I need to save time, or I'm too tired at the end of a day to cook. So I'm going to order food. And I'm guilty of that too. I'm not saying I'm above that by any means. I use some of those services as well.
We're all
So
just cogs in the machine, man.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, as much as we try to talk about it and uncover the connections between some of these things, it's still like we can't be totally separate from it. Not going to be, you know,
It,
Unabomber living out in the
yeah,
woods in a shack kind of thing. That's I'm
not
not
yet. I
not
mean,
yet anyway.
no,
Not
I,
the Unabomber part, just the living
yeah.
in the shack part.
I mean, I'll throw this in there. It's not that it's all necessarily bad,
Right,
right? But I think it's important to
right,
think about it and understand and be cognizant of what's going on. Now, whether people care or not, I can't make them, you know, can't make them care.
right, right. So yeah, so I think to the cycle point, I was thinking also of healthcare and how the food supply is getting to be a certain way, and a lot of people can't afford good, fresh, clean, let alone organic options. So they're forced to whether by cost or even availability, just forced to have lower quality food that they eat and they feed their families. And then that results in some long-term health problems. And then they're in the healthcare system, and then they have to pay more money for the healthcare system. They're already paying out of pocket for insurance. And, even if they have some coverage through a job, but a lot of the time, if you're working in several jobs, especially let's say, a handful of part-time jobs, you're not necessarily going to get benefits. So you have to go through something like Obamacare to get your coverage, which is awesome that we have that option. But it's still like there's a lot of individual costs layered onto that, let alone the impacts to your health and your well-being and your daily just feeling. How does it feel to get out of bed? Is that something that's easy to do? Is something that's hard to do? Like what's your day-to-day living like? And then just getting into that cycle of being in the healthcare system, and then spending a lot of money on that, and then being in debt, and then having less time to spend with your friends and family, and having less time to cook, and all those things. It's just like it seems like all these cycles are just getting more out of control over time, whether it's the cycle you were talking about, or the food and healthcare and the deregulation of polluting into our atmosphere and into our rivers, and then poor communities being subject to that, and then having to deal with that. So it's just like feels like, and again, now I'm kind of spinning this up and kind of catastrophizing, but I think that's a real concern for people. There's a ton of communities out there that have to deal with these issues. Not to mention, I think at a basic level, everyone has to deal with healthcare at some point in their life. Even if they're really lucky and really healthy, accidents happen, etc. So I'm just trying to say, it just feels like these cycles that we're automatically a part of because these are the systems that we live within. These cycles are spinning up. They're getting more aggressive. They're getting faster. They're getting bigger, and it's just something everyone's going to have to deal with at one time or another if they're not already on a daily basis.
When you were talking about food and stuff, it made me think about, you see these documentaries and you read these things, and it's in the news all the time, the idea of food deserts. Poor communities don't necessarily have good grocery stores, or the convenience stores that are there don't carry a lot of good healthy food. It's a lot of super processed, big brand stuff, not always made with the best ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there plays into a getting a little touchy subject here, but like I hate to say it, but like a race-based segregation. There's a reason that stuff happens sometimes like that.
Yeah.
Right? But I have noticed you go into a lot of rural areas and you stop by a convenience store and you also see a lot of the same, products. Because
it's almost like a class thing rather than just a race thing. It's a race and class.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I've definitely thought there's something to that over the years. I think there's something worth digging into too, about how, and again, I always encourage anybody listening to this, to go out and do some of your own, digging too. But a lot of fertilizers, a lot of stuff that goes into big agriculture is petroleum based. There's a lot of petroleum usage in large agriculture. A lot of those companies, there's always one that comes to mind. Bayer is a big company that, what do they also make? Medicine, aspirin. So you've got this cycle of, hey, we've got these large conglomerate companies producing some of the poorest food. And I'm saying that because of things like high fructose corn syrup. We grow all this corn. Where does it go? It goes to grain for cattle, which, again, there's debates on whether cattle are even supposed to eat grain or not. I'm sure some farmers would argue with me, but and it goes into high fructose corn syrup. It's not corn you can eat. Soybeans. We grow all these soybeans. Well, soybean oil is not the healthiest stuff in the world, so we're massively producing these poor food products, And then the same company's on the back. Hey, guess what? You got a heart problem now because you eat high fructose corn syrup and soybean all the stuff all the time, and now you're overweight and unhealthy. You know what you should do every day? You should take a Bayer aspirin for make sure you keep your heart under control.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, and didn't Bayer buy Monsanto?
Maybe, I don't know. I didn't.
I think it was one of those that bought one of those gigantic conglomerates that bought Monsanto, and of course they're the ones that make the seeds and the pesticides and the industrial scale farming. They make Roundup supplies,
which has glyphosate in it, which is one of the worst cancer-causing things out there, chemical compounds out there.
Yep.
And then on the back end, same company wants to come in and treat you for your illness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those cycles we were talking about. Yeah. That's yeah, and that's what, again, a lot of people don't even think about that stuff, and that's one of the reasons why we do the show, to highlight some of those connections between things that just often don't think about, and let alone have the time to do the research. So that's what we love to dig into, that kind of thing. So
yeah, let me say real quick too. Like I've said stuff. I mean, these aren't necessarily new ideas I've had, and I've said some stuff to people over the years, and I've been labeled,
you've been saying this for years.
Yeah, I've been labeled a conspiracy theorist. Well, see, there's conspiracy theories and there's conspiracies. Like, if there's actual breadcrumbs to follow to a conclusion, I mean, those are like documentable things. But I'm not. I just want to let everybody know, like, I'm not. This is going to be offensive. I'm not like the wacko conspiracist type. I mean, guys, the Earth is round. Just saying, we've known it for a long time. Anyway, go ahead.
Right on. So the third thing is social media, which I don't really think we need to spend a lot of time on this. I think we all have a pretty good idea of what that means and what that is. But I think the key point there is that it kind of creates a superficial image of self. And I think that's sort of a concern. And I think clearly it's certainly for younger people, a contributor to maybe poorer mental health, an image of yourself that is not accurate. And we already have enough problems with poor self-image and bullying in schools, and not feeling like you live up to the standards that you should. And there's just already, I think, enough issues for being a young person coming up in society, and then you throw social media on top of that, and I just think that's exacerbating a lot of issues that were already there. I mean, when you and I grew up, we still had those issues. We just didn't have a social media platform to amplify it, but we still dealt with a lot of those same things. And I think it's just, unfortunately, not saying that social media is all bad by any means. I think there are positive aspects to it as well, but just, I think, between exacerbating the problems of self-image, and also, I think, contributing to a drastically diminished attention span for people, and all the problems that entails. I think those two things are pretty big concerns, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And I think, that aspect of technology is pretty much embedded in society and is here to stay.
Yeah, when we were in school, I mean, I mentioned before, we dealt with some weight problems and stuff my whole life. And, when we were in school, my pool of comparison was the people we went to, that we went to school with. And, like, okay, there was like, where did I rank amongst the guys? And, when you're competing for girls, right? Or anything like that. And it was limited to a certain comparison size sample. And then, okay, maybe if you went to like a football game or something, and there was other people from other schools, or you went to the mall or something, I mean, you're pretty limited and you saw people. Okay, if you go to the mall, people would, put on their best clothes, or whatever, try to, if they're trying to socialize, trying to, meet someone or whatever. But you sometimes saw people in their best possible state, but sometimes you didn't. with social media, now you've broadened that pool to like everybody that's on social media, and you know, this
Right.
perfectly tailored, like, oh, I'm only gonna take this clip of me looking my absolute best and doing the absolute coolest thing I could possibly be doing, and that's the only thing I'm gonna share out there. And then the people looking at that, now their comparison is a much larger sample size and only people at their absolute best. And I think that's what makes that
Mm-hmm.
whole thing just exponentially worse, you know.
Yeah.
But then I'll add on the social media piece too, like back to the data collection thing we were talking about a little bit
Mm-hmm.
ago. And I think I've heard the reference to this before, like the attention economy. I don't know if I forget which podcast it was. I think it was one of the Bulwarks. Recently, they were talking about the CEO or someone from the board of directors or whatever of TikTok saying, like, our goal is basically for you never to look away from this app.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So there are some, you know, pretty sort of, again, it can have some positive benefits, but there are some kind of nefarious things behind the scenes there of, you know, and then
Yeah.
data and attention, and that gets back into advertising and then potentially influence, you know,
Yeah.
influence, you know, could be from a political standpoint, could be from, you know, other things, but
Yeah.
it has its downsides for sure. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the commodification aspect of things, right? So it's commodifying
Yeah.
your time and your eyeballs, and it's putting more ads in front of you and trying to get you to consume more and more and different things. And I would also say another to one of the things you said kind of in the middle there about, you know, the people worrying about finding the perfect snapshot to take and to share, and what happens when that's happening. Or you think about a concert, and you see, if someone, you know, you see a video of it, and 50% of the people have their phones up, and that's what they're doing. They're paying attention to their phones. They're not actually experiencing the moment. And if they're out, you know, at the zoo or out there out wherever, like, and they're looking for the perfect shot, and they're focused on capturing the moment in a specific way. And not that we always haven't had cameras and have been thinking about, oh, I want to capture this memory, but just it seems like an over focus on capturing and sharing and communicating that, and as a way to, you know, portray status, um, instead of actually enjoying the moment and being with who you're with and experiencing it and creating a memory of it. And so I wonder if we're just, I think we've talked about this before too, where we're literally almost rewiring our brains to think of it in that way, not creating actual memories in our heads and living a more fulfilled life that way. So
Yeah, wasn't there a we made a lot of great points there. Yeah, the purpose of taking the picture has changed, right?
yeah.
But wasn't there was a Black Mirror episode where there was I want to say it was one of the first couple seasons where like you basically didn't have your own memory. There was
Mm,
like your whole memory was on
yeah.
like a chip or something, or you had to literally go like download your own memories if you wanted to,
Yeah.
you know, if you wanted to remember anything. And that makes me, what you were saying there kind of made me think about that. Like, are we going to get to the point where we have to just like essentially log everything and record everything so we have some basis to go back to? And then here's a question. Here's a question on top of that is, will it get captured exactly as it happened, or will everything become edited and cut a certain way, so now when you even go back to your own memories, you only get those, you get it the way you wanted to think about it, how it was, or wanted to remember it versus what
Mm.
actually happened? I don't know, that's getting a little scary.
Yeah, that, no, I could see that for sure, right? I mean, just that sort of selective, you know, experience, versus, which I think we all probably do to some aspect of it anyway, right? I mean, memory is a funny thing. How
Yeah,
it's, you can ask 10 people that witnessed, let's say, a crime or something, and they're all going to have a slightly different take on it. And especially if you get over time, you know, that those
yeah, because
memories are going to degrade and stuff. So,
yeah, well, they say, well, I heard this at least one place, that you only remember the last time you remembered it. So if each
Oh,
time
yeah.
you remember it a little differently, then your own memories change over time to,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like the telephone game, it changes just that little bit every time until the 100th time you remember it may only be so accurate compared to what actually happened at the time because you only remember that last time you remembered it.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So let's move on to number 4 here, which is the gap between the rich and the poor. And I think this is uh, pretty self-evident what this is talking about, but I'll throw some numbers around this for you. Um, for example, in the first quarter of 2024, 67% of the total wealth in the United States was owned by the top 10% of earners. In comparison, the lowest 50% of earners only own 2.5% of the total wealth in this country. And so another another look at that in a slightly different way, but that backs that up, is in the US in 1990 there were 66 billionaires. As of 2023, there were 748 billionaires, which is absurd. And that's just in the United States. I think there's something like 2,000 around the world when you take into account all countries. And so also another thing to add to that is you think of disaster capitalism, for example, the total wealth of this group, so of those billionaires, they had a combined 2.9 trillion roughly in 2020. That almost doubled to 5.5 trillion in 4 years. So in 2024, that went from 2.9 trillion to 5.5 trillion. So you tell me the average person, suffered and had to deal with a lot of shit through COVID, through the last 4 years, the last year of Trump's presidency, and then into, this year. And yet the billionaires, oh, they were doing just fine. So they are sitting at almost $6 trillion now in combined wealth. So, I mean, how is that sustainable, right? How is that sustainable? And we could go
How does it even
into,
happen?
I mean, well, it's years and years. I mean, thank Reagan, thank, Lewis Powell, thank those guys that, even Nixon back then, like, you think, and I mentioned this earlier too. I'll bring this up real quick because I think it's relevant too. So, let's see here. So, the average person, Americans' wages have gone up over the last 40 years, but purchasing power is basically the same. So, wages adjusted for inflation have actually stagnated since the mid 70s, really going up about 9%, adjusted for inflation, while productivity has gone up 74% in that time. So it's like we were talking about before, where typically productivity and wages would go up at a relatively parallel pace. And so we saw that from the beginning of the 20th century up until the 70s. And then since then, productivity has continued to go up, but wages haven't. So that's one thing. So basically, again, starting from the mid 70s up through the Reagan years, I think that comes back to attacking unions, destroying the union power base, rulings from the Supreme Court that have allowed dark money, to be freely spent. Like, it costs more and more to run for elections nowadays. The average wealth of politicians, I mean, if you take all of Congress, the average or the median net wealth is about $1 million. So your average politician is worth about $1 million. And I don't know a single person in my life who's worth $1 million, like, personally. So, so anyway, I think it's just literally a sustained campaign of owning the politicians, manipulating things behind the scenes, lobbying, campaign financing, to try to get deregulation, to try to attack unions, reduce the power of labor, give power to the corporate class and the billionaire class. And then, again, through recessions, billionaires tend to do great. They buy up stocks at low prices when the stock market's down. They'll buy back their own stock, for example. to increase their compensation packages, these CEOs and stuff, and then they don't increase wages. They just put it back in their own little bubbles. So anyway, so yeah, that's a lot of rambling there. What do you? I don't know if I answered your question or not, but what do you think of that?
I don't even remember the question. No, no, that's some interesting statistics.
Yeah.
I'd heard similar stuff before. The 2020 2.9 trillion amount of wealth for those 748 billionaires compared to the 2024 5.5 trillion. Man, a lot of stuff goes through my head there. I'd love to know the 2016 to 2020 numbers. That's not that I expect you to have them.
Right. Yeah.
Because you hear all this debate about, kind of Trump versus Biden versus what Harris is going to do when it comes to the election.
Mm-hmm.
And what I couldn't help but think about there, I mean, a lot of the economic numbers during the Trump presidency, arguably pretty good, right? At the time,
Mm-hmm.
record stock market at the time, I think he at the time hit the lowest unemployment number, at least for I know the one that gets argued about a lot is, black unemployment was,
Mm-hmm.
he did hit a record there. It's since been surpassed. You
Yes.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the other thing I always like to throw out there, again, might piss a lot of people off, but Trump did also inherit a very nicely functioning economy from Barack Obama. It's not like he built that thing up from scratch, from nothing. You know what I mean? It's not like he got handed a recession.
Right.
He got handed a very, very functioning economy. But point being, all this talk now, all this feelings people's experiencing in the economy. Now, obviously, the wealth of billionaires does not reflect the status or conditions of the average working class person. Fully acknowledge that for crying out loud. But there's a lot of billionaires supporting Donald Trump right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reading on this piece of paper I wrote down as you were talking that they have almost doubled their wealth in the 4 years that Joe Biden's been president. Mm-hmm. So what exactly is their complaint there?
Right.
And I couldn't help but think, in 2020, in the pandemic, and the PPP program, and it seemed like there for a while, every time I turned around, I was hearing something about how somebody was getting money that they shouldn't have, either getting money that they shouldn't have, or found a way to completely exploit that system so badly that I'm forced to think one of two things. Either it was designed to do exactly that, to be exploited by the people who would figure out how to exploit it. And I know there's people on all ends of the spectrum that got away with some shenanigans during that time. But I hear a lot about wealthy people exploiting the PPP system. So either it was designed to do that, or, I mean, the people who were running it under Trump weren't very smart. Didn't set that up in a way to have it run very well. Now they were under a time crunch there. I mean, I get they had to rush into a lot of things. But when I read that number from 2020 to 2024, I'm thinking, well, how much of that money was exploited and essentially stolen during the pandemic, and then turned around in Biden's economy and invested in, record stock market, record growth, and just grown in that time. So yeah, something's definitely not working for the people that need it the most.
Right. And unfortunately, I think, well, I was going to go into a critique of the left for a minute here, and just in service of saying how basically both parties are essentially the same when it comes to still being a plutocracy, still being run by the money.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm going to save that for a second because I still want to
get. There's degrees of severity. I think.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the point that I was going to make with that was what they should do about it, not just not just point it out and complain
Yeah.
about it. But yeah, I think I have some ideas, and I know you probably do as well. Things that we can talk about to try to change those cycles we're talking about. But I do want to get to real quickly the last two elements. One is stagnant wages, which I did just talk about. I kind of jumped the gun on that one stat with the wage increases over 40 years, but purchasing power basically being the same. So really not getting ahead, just keeping up with inflation basically. Um, and then the productivity and wage gap as well. So we already talked about that. But I will say though that it's not just in the US, it's the UK, Japan, some parts of the Eurozone have all either fallen or remained stagnant as well. So I think that's a concern. And that's as we start getting into more and more multinational corporations and the system that we have starting to bleed over into the rest of the industrialized world. I think we're starting to see similar concerns in other parts of the world as well. And then the final one being the environmental breakdown, and the way the way this little summary that I read kind of classifies it as it's part of the wicked trinity of crises that include climate catastrophe and economic stagnation. So I think environmental breakdown, that's a really big topic. So I really don't want to dive into that too much, spend too much time on that. But I think everybody realizes that at least everybody here and hopefully maybe listening to this
I'm gonna
podcast
say not
at
everybody.
this point, no, not everybody, but I think there's at least a consensus amongst, the scientific community anyway, that, the environment is in trouble and humans are, well on their way
I
to
mean,
making it worse and causing it in the first place.
if
So
you believe the experts.
the expert. What fools.
Yeah, I mean the
Anyways,
people who've devoted their lives to that study and that,
yeah, and use data and
yeah.
like actual facts and peer reviewed journals and all that nonsense. Yeah, it's shit. It's all shit. Anyway, so we can definitely spend a whole episode talking about that. But that's kind of the final element of late stage capitalism. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes. I know we're getting on late in the episode here, but I wanted to spend a few minutes at least talking about a couple ideas of, or at least some concepts of things that could be done. And I think the one that I just alluded to before that was for the left. I mean, we really have to, and I say we as in because I consider myself a progressive, and we really have to shun wealthy donors and turn back to the labor movement and actually be a populist movement, not just virtue signal like the right does, like Trump and his populist language, and actually mean it. We've got to get Citizens United overturned. I think I've said this before, maybe not on the podcast yet, but really there are so many major problems with government and society and stuff that need to be fixed. But I think at the root of it all is money in politics. And so until we can get that sorted out, I don't think there's a point in really spending any time or energy on anything else, honestly. I mean, I know that sounds pretty dramatic, but if there's still money in politics, if there's still lobbyists behind the scenes writing legislation for people and with their tendrils in all those back rooms and everything, I think until that dark money is out of politics, until Citizens United is overturned, nothing materially is going to change. And so, and this is something that I know John Stewart mentioned is, I think maybe this most recent show that he did, which was excellent, by the way, is the left is literally participating in this system, but saying, oh, yeah, we've got to participate in it to get into power and then to correct it. Well, they've had periods, they've had the trifecta before over the last decade or so and multiple times, and they've not done anything about it, really. To, again, to actually change how that works and the actual system itself. So I think they're just as guilty as, again, this goes back to Reagan, where the Republicans started taking corporate money in the time of Reagan. And at that point, the labor unions was the major source of Democratic campaign funding, and the labor force and the union movement was massive then. I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but it was a really high percentage of people in the workforce that were part of unions. And so they really wielded true power, and there was enough money there that the Democrats didn't have to rely on corporate donations. And at the time there weren't as many billionaires, but there still were, but those oligarchs and the corporations, they didn't have to rely on them for financing. And then once the Republicans changed that game and then started dismantling unions, that power went away, the money went away, and they had to start relying on the same donors, maybe different donors, but the same concept, the same corporate donor class to compete. And so once they got them in that trap, the Republicans sucked the Democrats in. And so that's why I say at the end of the day, behind the scenes, it's about the money, not the party, that's really running things. So
yeah, John, I was listening to that Jon Stewart episode too, and he made the comment. He was interviewing Nancy Pelosi at some point in the past, and she basically said, well, we got to get the money out of politics. And he's like, well, didn't you just make like 39 million or something on your last campaign? And she's like, yeah, but that we don't get, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't get, polluted by the money, or we don't get,
we're not corrupted by it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, so you're special, you're different.
Yeah. That was an interesting breakdown you had there between in the Reagan era and how distinct that was. And what I couldn't help but think is, if that divide was that clear, but yet we weren't near as divided then as we are now. You know what I mean? Like, it's...
You mean like politically, in terms of like... Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. We seem way further apart now, or at least it's more malicious, the division sometimes. And
well, that's what money does, right? It says, don't pay attention to us. Don't dig into who's truly in power. It's the immigrants. It's the white working class. If you're black, if you're white, it's the or black people in the cities that are, the crime and this and that. And it's always like someone else, some other group, those are your enemies. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain, kind of thing. At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, where it's less about race than it is about class. It's become the top.
Yeah.
It's, instead of the left and the right pushing against each other, it's become the top pushing down on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do to keep the blinders on for everybody is make everybody at the bottom fight each other.
Yeah.
It's what you just said, really. That's
what it is for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something else. Oh, something else I was kind of thinking about I knew the general topic of the episode, right, but not all the details you were going to bring. It just got me thinking, and I'd have to go back and do some research on this, and I didn't, because literally the idea just popped in my head like at one point, and I'm surprised I even remember it, because I got so much going on. We listen to so much stuff. I think back to the Occupy Wall Street movement back in like the 2010-ish time frame or whenever that was, and some of the reactions I remember hearing from people, and it was associated to be kind of a left movement against the 1%, this and that. And I always remember people would hear the dumb comments like, "Oh yeah, well I saw somebody out there with an iPhone, so I guess things couldn't have been that bad." You know what I mean? And then I think about what we hear out of the I'd say the right, but the Trump supporters now, and I wonder how much similarity there actually is between what Occupy Wall Street was saying back then and what the supposed populist right is saying now. But somehow they've got a, hand-me-down billionaire at the top of their ticket and a, Silicon Valley propped up stooge as the second spot on the ticket. And somehow they think their solutions to their problems are going to come from that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just an interesting dichotomy there of ideas and what people think their solutions are going to be.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, and I mean, I think to build on what you're saying there, it's not just the behind the scenes influence of money now. It's literally could be, let's say, if Trump gets elected, he's talking about putting Elon in charge of efficiency and what's the and oversight of the entire government.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the most wealthy man in the entire planet having a cabinet position in the government in charge of oversight and waste and fraud and abuse, who doesn't know jack shit about that, but he's the top donor to Trump, or a top donor, and an extremely wealthy man, and that he's literally having a direct role in the government
Well,
potentially.
and you talk
So
about
it's not
Biden.
even behind the scenes anymore.
Well, it's not behind the scenes anymore either, and he's offering people money
Yeah,
out in Pennsylvania. I know that's
yeah,
not directly to vote for Trump, but
yeah.
it's to sign some petition. I don't remember exactly
Right,
what
some meaningless, yeah, but like some pledge or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely not hiding anymore. It is right out in the open.
Yep.
The top donor to Trump owns one of the most significant, or at least maybe not anymore, but a pretty significant player in the social media space as far as, communication.
Huge information platform, yeah.
Yeah, somebody brought it up. It was Mark Cuban on some interview he was doing. He's been quite the advocate for Harrison Walls lately,
Yeah.
and I've always liked that guy. Man, he just seems like talk about like a common sense billionaire. Like just some of the stuff he says. But he was saying, the right always rails against the mainstream media. Well, what's the mainstream media anymore? If you go by which podcasts are the most popular, if you go by which cable network gets the highest ratings, the mainstream media is right-wing media at this point. You know what I mean? They've got the most influence. I mean, Fox News is basically a part of the Trump campaign at this point. They carry so much water for him. It's not even funny.
Oh, yeah.
For all the comments they have about MSNBC and CNN and everybody else, like, it's a rare event when Joe Biden calls into, like, say, Morning Joe or something, or,
Right.
I'm not as familiar with the shows on CNN. But when Trump was president, he was regularly calling into, like, Fox and Friends. And, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's just look at the stats and the facts about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then, okay, while I'm on it, let's go back to like the Dominion lawsuit. When we saw in those what was released when Dominion won their lawsuit against Fox, and Fox had to pay $787.5 million to Dominion, and some of the text messages and the stuff that came out from the Fox News personalities, where not only did they not like Trump, but they don't even like their own viewers. They look down on their own viewers.
Right.
But now, 3 years on, they are continuing to lie to them on behalf of someone they don't actually technically support. But that information will never get to the people that need to know about it.
Right. Right. And they're just hoping, like, okay, so Trump is saying that he wants to yank the licenses of NBC, MSNBC, ABC, CBS. And so who's going to be left standing? Fox News.
Yeah. Fox News, OAN, Newsmax. And the second he gets mad at one of them about something, somebody else steps up.
Yep.
With the whole, when Fox News called the election for Biden was it Arizona, I think, in 2020. And next thing he's bad mouthing Fox News, Newsmax's ratings shoot up. I mean, that right there, part of your corporate control, corporate power in this country. Our news, all of our news organizations have become these large profit-driven corporations, and it's a wonder we get any good news out of any of them.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I would say, that in the umbrella of social media, like independent journalists, independent investigators, and actual people that have outside voices outside of that structure, that mainstream structure, I think that is definitely a positive that we've seen out of that, that creator economy kind of
Yeah,
mentality, which I think is definitely a positive, because if we didn't have that and all we had to rely on was mainstream media, then I mean, I know I wouldn't feel nearly as informed or good about the information that I have.
yeah, I agree. And I will say this: I would, I would, if I have two choices in the mainstream media, one is somebody's gonna, if I assume they're both gonna be biased, one way or the other, but one is telling me the truth and
Mm-hmm.
facts, even if they have biased opinions on it, that's where I'm going.
Yeah, same.
And everybody could go, oh yeah, well you just think it's true or whatever. No, I mean like it's backed up by other things and other things I can see in the world and other a lot of it's not disputable.
Mm-hmm.
It's just if you're even aware of what's actually happening or not. I mean, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
leave it. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to wrap up, actually. I think this has been a fun episode, and even though it's a heavy topic, and I don't know that we came to any conclusions on solutions for this. I mean, it's again, it's the system that we live in for a reason, and it's I think for now it's gonna stay. But I
actually,
hope that
actually,
that we. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry. Can I make one more point on it?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
Uh, I think people sometimes get too caught up in isms, and I think I've said
Mm-hmm.
this to you before in our past conversations. There's socialism, communism, capitalism, and all this stuff, and people get so caught up in isms, and any conversation about it starts to go to those words, and somebody might hear a certain word, and then they should just shut down in the conversation. I'm going to go back to something we said early in the conversation. Think about what where the solutions who the solutions are working for. Are the solutions working
Mm-hmm.
for the people or are they not? Where's the wealth going? Is the wealth going to the top? Is it going to the people? Let's focus on those things and we'll
Yeah.
get to solutions that work for the people and stop worrying about what ism you call it. Because my opinion, if Trump gets reelected, we are going to have a capitalistic system with a authoritarian dictator at the top who is filtering his wealth to all his friends, just like Putin does in Russia with whatever system you
Yeah.
want to call that. And
The
then
oligarchy and the nepotism and all
yeah,
that crap.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll sit here. Some of us will sit here and go, "Oh, well, we're capitalistic, so we're just we're under capitalism, so we're just fine." You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? No. Throw the isms out and look at what's actually happening out there. So sorry to interrupt your
Yeah.
closing, but I just wanted to
No.
throw that last part out there.
Yeah. No. That's actually. I think that's a great way to wrap it up, because I think that's a little more hopeful and a little more um, succinct way to bring it together. And it reminds me too of one other point that I wanted to make really quickly, was about how when we had the recession, the Great Depression, and how public investment helped bring us out of that, the New Deal and high taxes on the wealthy, and making sure that the system, the government, especially the state, worked for the people and gave people opportunities to help basically work themselves out of that recession and out of the Great Depression, and build the economy back, but also build infrastructure and be a positive impact on the country. So I think that's one of the things that really will help, is if we actually have state research, state investment, and not going right from capitalism to socialism, but something along. I know you said, again, we don't want to focus on the isms because that can really divide people, but just thinking like, if we have systems in place that put people first, not profit. I think that's the central core, that the question that really needs to be answered every time we make a decision in politics.
Yeah, you bring up the New Deal, and we touched on this in a previous episode too. Right after that is it was the 50s when everybody was able to have single income families build a house, buy a car, put money away for
Mm-hmm.
retirement. I mean, that was a great time. Why do so many people look back on that as like the New Deal is like a bad thing. All that
Right.
investment led to that lifestyle that so many people look back now and make America great again. That's what you're pointing to, basically. It's like
Right.
those times. Well, what
Yep.
got us there? Let's do that again. All right, I'm
Yeah.
done.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks as always, Triple M, for another great episode, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Again, give us a follow and a rating if you can spare a moment, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.